Joining us now to talk about it, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell, who is running for the Congress of the United States. Steve, I've been there. I know campaigns can be interesting. Thanks for taking time from the trail.
Well, thank you. And a lot of things going on in the world.
They are, and there are a lot of things happening, Colonel. Let's talk first of all about what's happening in the Middle East and this whole emergence of a caliphate. How would you define that?
I think it's very dangerous because it gives this notion to jihadist and Wahhabist line of Sunni thinking that they have some place to rally and shortcut their religious faith, securing their eternal security. That's very dangerous. The caliphate, all of this harkens back to the very foundations of their glory days, and so it can have great appeal, especially for the young, more radical elements of the Muslim faith, and they may rally to the cause, much like what we saw with Al-Qaeda in the late 90s.
Colonel, you've said the formation of a caliphate would be the biggest threat to peace in the Middle East in decades. Is it safe to say that this would also be the biggest threat to the United States, or one of many?
I think that we have to approach any solution about this collectively, and I'm concerned that the president is trying to act in these situations with Iraq unilaterally. That's not the approach we need to take, because these radicals with ISIS, they are declaring a new territory that really transcends territory from three existing sovereign states. And that's a problem. You can't have a terrorist type entity that is promoting that they are going to take over. It could upset the sovereignty of several nations, and it would certainly upset the world's economy from that region.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the situation with Abu Khatallah, who's being tried here in the United States, and clearly the Obama administration is trying to send a message to terrorist organizations that if you are captured by the U.S. government, whenever that occurs, you're going to be treated like a common criminal in many ways. Do you think that message is effective in the region? Is it getting out? And is this idea that the Obama administration seems to be trying, is that going to work?
I don't think it will if they think that they can have the security and protections of our Fourth Amendment, of our Bill of Rights. We should not treat declared enemies of our country with the courtesy of our judicial system. Rather, we should look at it more along the lines of war tribunals. Now, this is something that President Bush had requested and was denied repeatedly. And yet there's precedent all the way back. Franklin Roosevelt made very good use of war tribunals when you had enemy agents that washed up on our shores here in the United States, and the FBI dealt with them swiftly. What we can't afford to do is make these people think that they're going to camp out in well-fed and well-cared incarceration, and now they'll get the finest lawyers that our nation has to offer. That's not much of a threat to them, to be honest.
Colonel Steve Russell, as you transition from your time in the military to running for elective office and running for the Congress, for purposes of full disclosure, those of us who run for public office, or have in the past, pay attention to polling. And it seems the American people right now are very reticent to think about boots on the ground back in the Middle East. Colonel, if you were devising the policy to deal with the ascendancy of ISIS and also deal with other Middle Eastern concerns, specifically what's going on in Iraq, though, what would that policy boots on the ground?
I think we have to secure our own embassy and our interests there, even if that means increasing military forces. That's not something that's unusual. We have done that without a scenario where we re-enter with large formations. But look, we need to tie all of the instruments of national power, diplomatic, military, information, our intelligence, all of these, economic to be certain, all of the instruments that we bring to bear for Iraq and its future, which they rely on us heavily, that needs to be tied into Prime Minister Maliki's power sharing. He was elected. They have so many days to form a new government. And all of this needs to be communicated where it says, look, you have to go out you have to allow the Sunni Arabs to have redress in the political process. They need to have parliamentary leadership positions in proportion to their numbers. They need to have cabinet posts. You need to put a coalition government together. Maliki has shown no desire to do that, and we've not shown the courage and the force to say that you must do this, and therein lies the problem. If you are a Sunni Arab living in Tikrit, you don't want to be a jihadist, you don't want Sharia law, you're secularist by nature, but you have no political future in the country, and you have the AK-47 on the other side. These people do not want this for themselves. It's a false notion to say they do. And my heart just goes out to these people. I lived among them. They do not want this. The situation is not irretrievable. We have to exert leadership, and we have to bring other nations, to include Middle Eastern and Muslim nations, to bear collectively to solve this problem.
Well, Colonel Russell, you talked about your own experience in uniform in that situation. I'm just wondering, you take a step back now, and you spoke of the difficulties now as Parliament was supposed to reconvene in Iraq. The other day, you could call it a legislative meltdown. Can Maliki stay as prime minister and affect the change that you just outlined?
On the one hand, he does hold a grip on the more radical elements of the Shia Arabs. I'm not sure you want the Sadrists and others and the Badr Corps that have entered politics in their parliament gaining ascendancy. That would be very dangerous as well. But then the flip side of that is he was kind of the lowest common denominator that was allowed to become prime minister. He's not a strong leader. They do need a strong leader, but they have to have one that includes people that will not continue to divide. And ISIS knows this. In fact, the attacks on the holy sites in Samarra, they're trying to separate this along religious lines. They want to divide this up. But the ground forces in Iraq are gaining some momentum. And when you pick your military ground, which ISIS is doing, and you're cut off from the world, they're very isolated. They're in the western parts of Iraq. It's largely desert. The rivers flow south. There's not much support or roads that get to them for resupply. They've not struck out a very tenable position. So I don't think the situation is irretrievable, but the United States has to lead, and we've got to get some other countries collectively that will go in and do this with them.
Steve, about a minute and a half remains, and I was talking about poll numbers earlier. I just saw a recent poll that says approval for Congress is now down to 7%. So, Colonel, my question is an obvious one. With Congress at an all-time low, why did you make the decision to step out and run for Congress there in Oklahoma?
Sure. I think Samuel Adams said it best in a letter to James Warren in 1780 when it was clear that we had a country. And he said, if there ever comes a time when selfish and ambitious men gain the highest seats of power, we need of our experienced patriots to prevent its ruin. America knows what's happening to it. But look, leaders have to step up and put the country before themselves. I have country before themselves. I have, and I will. We have to have people that will help solve these problems, not just be divisive and create new ones.
Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell, a Republican candidate for Congress in the great state of Oklahoma, we thank you for your time and your input on these questions today. Well, we heard from the Colonel right there, and now we want to hear from you about Congress and its approval rating or lack thereof.
Or maybe who they think is the most selfish and most ambitious.
That's a good question, too. Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. There's also email and Facebook. We're coming back with more following this time out.